Hello and welcome to the March 2021 edition of the Pembrokeshire Bird Diary. I'm Annie Haycock from the Pembrokeshire Bird Group, here to share some of the highlights of the month. We'll start with Scoma, where new Warden Leighton and Assistant Warden Kerris arrived back on the 1st of March to find the track from the beach blocked by a landslide. But beyond that, the island provided its usual welcome. There were 4 red kites over North Haven and 15 chough over the neck. The wing-tagged marsh harrier, Orange IL, spent most of the following day hunting in North Valley. It was also seen at his usual mainland haunts during the rest of the month. A great northern diver was fishing off the Pigstone, and other birds included 3 woodcock, a ringtail hen harrier, 7 robins, a chiffchaff and a goldcrest. The raucous calls of Manx shearwaters at night showed they were back too. Day visitors should be able to return this summer, COVID restrictions permitting, so don't forget to check the website for new booking information. Gulls can gather in large numbers on the Teivi estuary. On the 7th, that included around 500 lesser blackbacks, 400 herring gulls, 100 black-headed gulls, 25 common gulls, 25 great blackbacks, 8 Mediterraneans and a first winter Iceland gull. There were several other sightings of Iceland gulls during the month, mostly on the Teivi or at the Gann, with additional sightings at Scoma, Fishguard Harbour and Newport Beach. It seems likely that at least 2 birds were involved, as they were seen in the south and north of the county on the same day, but there could have been more. With COVID restrictions being eased to allow us to travel a little further from home, it was possible to resume the wetland bird survey for the final count of the winter. Most species were on their way north now, so no large numbers of anything to report. However, there were occasional flocks of 200 or so golden plovers passing through, and shelduck were clearly pairing up ready for the oncoming season. 1 or 2 ring-billed gulls have been seen in Pembrokeshire in most years since 1990. However, it seems that individuals are site faithful, arriving as first or second year birds and subsequently returning in most winters. Therefore, it's assumed that a bird spending at least part of each winter at Lysafran Reservoir since 2006 is the same bird each time. It's been there since the 25th of November this winter and was still there on the 14th of March. The average lifespan for ring-billed gulls is around 10 years, but several birds have been known to reach 30 years old, so this one could be considered middle-aged and may return for several years yet. There were several reports of siskins at garden feeders in the second half of the month. Although siskins are with us all year round, there generally seems to be an increase in records in March. This is particularly noticeable in garden birdwatch results. This graph shows that the peak period for siskins being seen in gardens is in March, except in 2020 when there was a higher peak in June. Siskins often turn to bird feeders if their usual supply of conifer seeds is low. The BTO Garden Birdwatch team have suggested that the warm and dry spring of 2020 led to a good breeding season for the species, but by summer, when the weather was deteriorating, they were getting low on conifer seeds and were turning to gardens to make up the difference. It'll be interesting to see what happens this year. Black-tailed godwits have become a familiar sight in Pembrokeshire over the past 20 years, with 320 being the highest ever total on the Cleddau estuary in December 2019 and a further 50 or so scattered around the rest of the county. Occasionally we've seen a colour-ringed bird, and these showed that some, if not all, of our birds came from Iceland. That was until sharp-eyed Dave Astin saw this flagged bird at the Gann between the 17th and 27th of March. It had been ringed as a chick in the Netherlands in June 2019 and was in that area again in June 2020. The next sightings were these at the Gann, but then it was seen in Chichester Harbour in Sussex on the 2nd of April, presumably on its way back to its breeding grounds. It was the first definite continental one to be seen in Pembrokeshire, and only the second for Wales. An immature Glaucus Gull appeared on the Teivi on the 19th and was seen on and off until the end of the month. On the 26th another one appeared on the Gann, definitely a different bird as it was noticeably smaller. Meanwhile on Scoma, Richard and Giselle were busy counting and ringing birds as well as getting settled in for the season. During the month they recorded a few less common species. such as a house sparrow, a great tit, and a coal tit. Grey plovers are also somewhat scarce there, so it was good to see this one at North Pond. During the past 40 years, the earliest reported arrival date for swallows in Pembrokeshire has varied between the 10th of March and the 10th of April. This year they first appeared on the bird blog on the 19th of March and have been trickling through in small numbers ever since. Scoma saw 10 on the 29th of March, their first record of the year. This was about average first arrival date for Pembrokeshire, and indeed BirdTrack's data suggests they've been arriving exactly on time across Wales. The BTO's BirdTrack allows you to look at this year's data in comparison with previous years. You need to input a complete list for each site visit for records to be included. The reporting rate is the percentage of complete lists that include a particular species. As a few chiffchaffs winter in Britain, it can be difficult to decide just when the winter visitors leave, probably heading north and east to the continent, and the summer ones arrive. The historical reporting rate shows an increase from the second week in March, but in 2021 it seems to have been a week or so earlier. There was one report of a bird singing in mid-February, but generally they were heard from the beginning of March this year. The first sandwich tern of the season was seen on the 14th of March. The earliest date in the last 30 years was the 13th of March, and that happened in both 2005 and in 1994. And now here's Toby Phelps with a roundup of the month at Amroth.
March was an enjoyable month birding around the Amroth area as lingering winter visitors gave way to spring migrants. The first week of March saw a nice variety of sea ducks offshore amongst the regular common scoters, a small group of eider on the 5th, a velvet scoter just into Carmarthenshire at nearby Telpin Point on the 7th, a female long-tailed duck between Amroth and Wiselands Bridge on the 9th, which moved over to Coppet Hall where it was last seen on the 15th. This bird was likely the same individual seen in February. From the 17th onwards, spring migrants started to become a regular fixture. Chiffchaffs started singing from patches of woodland, and small groups of sand martins, meadow pipits and alba wagtails were arriving off the sea each morning. The first two wheatears of the year arrived at Telpin on the 18th, and my first swallow of the year appeared over Llanteg on the 29th. Sandwich terns became regular in the bay during the second half of the month. First seen on the 18th, a peak of 16 were noted from Wiselands Bridge on the 26th. Towards the end of March, there was a notable increase in activity offshore. This included a peak count of 114 red-throated divers from Amroth on the 25th, and the group of eider that were present throughout the month increased to 25 on the 31st of March.
This Redshank was ringed at the Gann in February 2018 as a first winter bird. It was then seen on Scoma in March of that year, and again in April and November. In 2019 it was only seen there in March, and there wasn't a single sighting of it anywhere last year. On March the 14th this year it was found again at North Pond on Scoma, just going about its redshanky business as usual. Sand martins have been trickling through since the end of February, but over 200 were seen on the Tivy marshes on the 18th, the largest count in a day so far. 2 pairs of black guillemots courting in Fishguard Harbour bodes well for the coming season. It's impossible to know how successfully they're breeding, but their presence during the spring and early summer is at least a good indication that they are actually breeding. Puffins had been seen around Scoma since the 7th of March, but made their first big landfall on the 22nd. And big is something of an understatement. Richard and Giselle counted a staggering 11,245 of them, the highest post-war total on the island, and about 30% higher than last spring. The highest ever totals were in the mid-1930s, when Ronald Lockley estimated there to be around 40,000 of them. Scoma puffins also made landfall, and they have their own ideas about social distancing. At the Tivy Marshes Reserve, some habitat management is required from time to time. The pool in the buffalo field had become overgrown, so needed some attention. Wet weather and a boggy field complicated the job, putting things on hold until the digger and dumper could get on site without sinking. However, it has now been dug out and slightly enlarged. Already moorhen, coot, little egret, heron and kingfisher have been using it. The first willow warbler was reported on March the 28th, followed by numerous sightings across the county over the next few days. The first sedge warbler of the season was recorded on Scoma on the last day of the month. This was the earliest ever record on the island, and one of the earliest for Pembrokeshire, certainly in the last 30 years. The actual record is held by a bird seen at Tenby Marsh on the 25th of March 1964. Well, that's a quick look at March. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll look out for the April edition.